Hello, Michal Hucko here, and welcome to another lecture or lesson of our REST API class. In this lesson, we're going to talk about writing data into database. As I mentioned previously, in this tutorial or in this course, I'm going to show you how you can use Django with PostgreSQL. But before we do that, I'm going to show you how you can use a technology which is called SQLite. SQLite is an alternative in a relation database world which is used mostly for development. SQLite allows you to write data or store the database within a file in your file system. Big relational databases like MySQL or PostgreSQL are creating servers, which allow you to connect multiple users into this database or write into this database from multiple users, read from this database multiple users, or execute some transactions and stuff like this. But sometimes you want to develop really fast without the need to run the big server in your local machine, and that's where the SQLite comes into play. Trust me, in one of my previous projects where I was working, we were using SQLite for even production use cases, but I don't recommend using SQLite for production. Please remember this for your future projects. So, what is this SQLite? Right now I'm in my Visual Studio Code. Again, you can find everything linked in the description below on my GitHub. And here you can see that this is the db.sqlite3 file, which is created every time you run a server. And even if you delete it and run it again, it will create this file again. It is here because if you go to school project into the settings and you scroll down, if you remember from the previous video, I already mentioned it, there is this databases part where you can specify the engine which you're going to use by Django to write to database. I don't know if you have been working with databases previously, but if you want to communicate with database, you need to write queries and this kind of stuff, which can be sometimes annoying. You need to create connections, create cursors. You need to make sure that the connection is ready, is not closed and stuff like this. And all this stuff is happening behind the scenes using these kind of engines, which Django provides here for you. So by default, you are using this DjangoDB Backend's SQLite3 engine, which allows you to write data into a SQLite database. Django behind the scenes is going to use concept which is called ORM, which stands for Object Relation Mapping, right, or Object Relation Mapper. In order to understand this, you need to understand the object-oriented programming within programming languages, and Python is one of the programming languages which allows you to use this object-oriented programming. ORM is a concept which is used across multiple programming languages, not just Python and Django. It's not Django thing, okay? For example, when I started my programming career, I was working or writing code in Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and Ruby on Rails is using also ORM to store the data in relational databases. And this engine is just saying, please use ORM or some best practices of ORM or some functions of ORM on top of SQLite. Fine, so this is the reason, or this is the way how you can specify the engine for ORM. Now, in order to use the ORM, you need to create a class which will specify the objects which will be stored in the database. And where you should specify this, or where you should put the specification of the class? Great question. In the school app, if you remember, there is this file which is called models. And that's where you're gonna specify this specification. So you need to create here a class. So I will delete this comment. I will go like class. The class will be the table name, which will be written in this database. So in this case, we want to use subject. Why we are doing this? Because if you remember previously in the views.py, I was storing everything in this variable, in this list of dictionaries. But every time I restarted something, all the changes were discarded. And again, we started from this, default value. And this is sometimes annoying. You need to, or in real world scenarios, multiple people are writing to database and you want to store these state of the application in this database, and every time you restart this application, the state should be loaded from the database. So that's the reason why we want to do that. So here I have class which inherits, it has to inherit from models.model. It's funny, right? It's a class provided by DjangoDB. That's the reason. And now, if you have been working with relational databases, you need to specify the columns of the database. And basically, columns in this case are the fields which we were using. And previously, I was using just the name field. And because Python is a dynamic typing language, you don't need to specify the types. But in case of databases, you need to specify the types of the columns. Here now you need to somehow specify the type of the column inside the SQLite database. And to accomplish this, you are using models. And here is, for example, we want to set this to char field. You can do it like this, but there are also other fields like integer field, boolean fields, and all the other fields which you can think of. And here you can put some constraints. For example, max length. It's highly recommended to specify some max length in order, to restrict some intruders to make some mess in your database by sending their whole book in the name field and stuff like this. So you are saying like this car field can have up to 256 characters. Why 256? Because I don't know, it's a multiplication of 2 and it's a nice number. And to make things more interesting, I will put here also a field which is called abbrev or abbreviation models car field, and again max length, and in this case it will be just 64 cars long. Sorry. Now the next thing what I want to specify here is a str function which helps you to print the objects. This will be useful in the future when I will be working with some ORM functions inside my shell. So here you are just saying what should be outputted whenever you print the object of this class. And you're gonna return some formatted string saying like name is self.name and abreu is just self.abreu. Right, so it's as simple as this. Fine, now when we have it, we need to somehow say that our Django application is part of the project and it should be written in this database. In order to do that, you need to go to the settings.py, and in the settings.py there is this part installed apps. And by default, your project already has some apps installed within, which are going to be used also in the database, which you will see in short time. But here you need to specify that you won't also include your school app here, and you are doing this by specifying a path to the apps file which can be found in the school app folder. This apps file specifies this school app config which you're gonna copy, and you go just like school_app.apps. Yeah, this is a full path. Yeah, go to school app and here is apps, and inside here I would like to access the class which is called school app config, and in this way I registered this app school app into the installed apps. I need to do this because later we're gonna create the tables inside the SQLite, and without this it will not work. Okay, so this is an important step. You always have to do this every time you create a new project or new app within your project. That's correct. Fine. Now having this, let's come to the fun part. I will open the terminal, and now what's the problem? The problem is now you have the specification of the tables in your models, but you never specified the way how the table should be written, or where is the prescription of the tables. If you have been working with the relational databases, there is this command create table where you need to specify all these fields and stuff like this. So how are you going to accomplish this? You're going to accomplish this with the concept which is called migrations. And we're going to talk about migrations in the future lectures, but for now you need to understand that migrations are used for creating the tables in the database. Because, for example, there is a John working with you on the same project and he doesn't have the same database in his local computer because you are using this SQLite thing, right? So you ain't gonna send him this file. Please never push this file into the Git. What you're gonna send him is a migrations file which will specify what steps should his Django accomplish in order to create this table within his database, okay? So first things first, we need to create these migrations. And there is already a migration folder which is empty in this cool app. So how are you going to generate these migrations? By running command python manage_py make migrations, right? So this command will generate the migrations for all the installed apps. And now just check what will be outputted. It's saying like migrations for school app migrations 001 initial.py. Now it created a file here. It wasn't here previously, with the migrations from DjangoDB. And this migration is saying like, please create model, so create table with the name subject, with these fields, and please put there some identifier because out of the box, every table needs to have a primary key, right? And I didn't specify it, so this is done out of the box, which is a big auto field, right? As you can see, it's some kind of an integer, auto created, it's a primary key. Then there is a name field, which is a car field with max length and abbreviation field and stuff like this. But still, if you look inside the DB SQLite tree, there is nothing. Everything is empty. So how are we gonna field or create this table in this database? By running command python manage_py migrate. By running migrate command, the tables will be created in this database. But strange things happen here. So after running this, suddenly there are tables and all these crazy signs are written here. This is a very special format which you can read as a human. You need a special tool, a special SQLite client, which we're gonna install shortly. But as you can see, this output is very interesting. Suddenly, it not only run your migration for 001 initial, It also ran some crazy migrations from some other things like content types out admin, content types out, and sessions. Where is this coming from? If you go to the settings.py, you remember these installed apps, it not only have your application here, it has also some things like admin, out, content types, session, messages, static files. Those are all the apps which came by default from your Django. So when you created the Django project, those things were already linked with the project which you created. And Django is using them behind the scenes. Yeah, of course, you could just comment them and skip them, but because I believe that you will be once working in some bigger projects, and it's very likely that those projects will have these things there. I just don't want you to be surprised in the future. That's the reason why I also included them in this tutorial. I led them there. So now the tables have been created for you. But how are you going to read them? So if you have been working with relational databases in the past, you need some client which will connect to the database and read from there. The same applies for SQLite. There are a bunch of other open source tools which you can download from the internet. For example, I really like the dbeaver tool, but for the simplicity, I didn't want to install some crazy app in your computer. We're gonna use a Visual Studio Code extension, which I really like. So if you want to install a new extension, you go to this extension pane and you put here things like SQLite. And the first response, I will show you also a picture with this feather. You click on SQLite and you click on install and then reload the window. This will install an extension which is called SQLite. Now coming back to any file you want, for example, this DB SQLite 3, you press Ctrl P and you write here this greater sign or less sign depending on from which side you are looking at it, and you put here SQLite command which is called open database. This will ask you to specify the file where the database resides. In my case, it's db.sqlite3. It's already presented here. If in your case, for some reason, it's not here, please click on choose database from file and navigate to the file where where it resides. So I'm clicking on db.sqlite3, and this will open here another pane, which is called SQLite Explorer. And if you click on this, there will be an SQLite 3 database. And if you click on this, there will be all the tables which were created for you within this file. So now you will see here all the tables which were created. And if you scroll them down, sorry, this window is too small. For some reason, I cannot resize it. But if you scroll them down, there will be a table which is called School Apps Subject. And when you click on this, this will show you what columns has been created for you. And one is the ID, because every table in your relational database needs a primary key, unique identifier, which is in this case ID. And it's like an integer primary key, not null, you can see here in the hint. Then there is the name, which is varchar, and abrev, which is the abbreviation for the subject. So this is the way how you can create the tables. Later in the videos, I'm gonna connect to a PostgreSQL, and we will still use these migrations and migrate. And I'm gonna use the same migrations because behind the scenes, these engines are just connecting to different databases, but the Python code is still the same. So you will use the same Python code for models, even if you connect for the PostgreSQL, which you will see in the next videos, right? And that's the magic of these frameworks. They are handling for you the connection to database, the sending the queries, and all this kind of crazy stuff, which you would need to handle on your own if you wouldn't be using this kind of frameworks. Now, how are we going to use this framework? That's the important question. How are you going to, for example, query those tables or create new records in these tables? We're going to use Python code. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to install some pip tool, which will help you to understand things much easier. It's called IPython. So please run the command pip install IPython, and this will install a special Python shell, which will help you to navigate through more crazy things much more quicker, and it will give you some type hints. I really like this tool. So after installing this, when you run pip list in your virtual environment, which should be activated, because if you are following this tutorial, I have been creating this virtual environment. I am still using it. So right now you can see I'm running IPython 7.31, but it's up to you. You can run higher versions depending on when you are watching this tutorial. So after running this, you can create or you can run a shell, a Django shell, which you can access with the command python manage_py shell. And if you install the IPython, this shell will be a little different than the Python shell which you are used to for example, from a simple Python. This shell will give you some hints, some history, and all this crazy stuff, which is very useful. So the question is, how you gonna query the table using solely Python code? First things first, you need these models to be important within your Python session. So you're gonna do it by running from right now I was reciting inside the school project. So in the school project, there is this subfolder school app. So from school, you can press tab and this will give you the type hint. Tab again, and it will just move up and down. So school app that tab models import, and I'm importing subject. Perfect. So this will import subject, and subject is not only this model, it allows you to run some special functions on top of this because it's inheriting from models.model. For example, you can run subject objects, and this will return something which is called a manager. This manager is very useful. You can, for example, get all the records in this table, and currently there are no records. It will return something which is called the query set. Basically, it's a list of results in this table. And right now it's empty because so far we didn't insert anything into this database. In a normal case, you would need to write a query with insert into table and some values. But because we are using this ORM method or ORM model to communicate with the database, we can create the object into the database from the Python scripts, from the Python command line, and later from the Python code, from the views directly, which we will talk about in the next lesson. But right now, let's concentrate on this. So how are you going to create an object? We're going to use a constructor. So subject has a constructor where you need to specify the columns, in this case, name and abbreviation. For example, I'm going to insert a maths subject and with the abbreviation of, let's say, math. Okay, this will create an object and I will assign this object to a subject. Yeah, you can traverse through the history using up and down arrows. So right now my subject has this name maths and abbreviation maths. Remember this __str__ function. Thanks to this function, I can now output it like this. And now I want to store this object because right now this is only in my Python session, right? If I click here and show table, it will show me what is inside the table, and currently is empty because there are no records, right? It's empty. So I want to insert this subject. I'm going to run a special function on top of this, which is called save. And save function will store this object inside my database. So if I now reload this show table, you will see that, yeah, it takes some time. Suddenly there is one record. So perfect. These ORM and Python backends help you to insert the tables without the need of queries and without the need of worrying about what is behind the scenes, whether it's PostgreSQL, whether it's MySQL, whether it's SQLite, right? So that's the power of ORM. Now, when you go for the same command from previous, like subject objects all, suddenly there will be one subject. Please feel free to create as many subjects as you want. You can now even turn off the session and turn it back again. The objects will still persist in the database, and that's the power of this database, right? Of the relational databases or databases in general. Now, these query sets or this ORM allows you also to filter. For example, let's insert one more thing. Let's say we want to insert history with the abbreviation of his, right? And I'll go like subject, that's safe. And it will store, if I reload now the table, it's quite small, I'm sorry. Now it's a history there. Now, for example, I don't want to retrieve all of the subjects, but I want to get the subject. There is a special method which is called get with the primary key of 1. This is the mathematics, and with primary key of 2, this is the history. Perfect. If you want to, for example, you can create some even more complicated queries, like I want to filter those subjects which starts with capital M. How are you going to do it? So I go like subject object, and now there is a special function which is called filter. And then you specify the name of the column, right? And then you put 2 underscore and you specify the function which you want to apply, like starts with. And there are a bunch of other functions. I highly recommend, and I will link in the description a documentation for these query sets and ORM in Django. Please go through the examples. You will find there a lot of functions for querying stuff and for doing all the crazy stuff which you are used to in your relational database. But for example, now if I put here starts with and M, this will return all the subjects where the name starts with M. So how crazy is this, right? You don't need to worry about writing queries and debugging this stuff. Python is handling everything for you. And so you can trust me that really behind the scenes the query has been created, because if you go back to this command and you put here a query, on top of this, this will return some query object, which you can print using a print statement. And this will return the select. which is applied behind the scenes. Wow. Okay, so this was a crazy lesson and I went a little bit faster because I don't know how good are you with relational databases. But really, if you are new to this, you need to take some courses in the relational databases before continuing with this. But even without that, maybe you will learn something. But feel free to go again through this lesson. I hope you learned how Django is creating the tables, what are the migrations, and how the ORM works. Like, we are creating the classes, which are then being translated into tables. And we are using these engines using Python and Django. Fine, I hope you liked this lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I will see you in the next one.